Ada. Heute das Morgen verstehen.
Please give a very warm welcome to Professor Yuval Noah Harari, the man who questions the future of our species.
Good morning once again, and we are really happy to have you. Thanks for taking the time. Yuval, you had the chance to talk to the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, yesterday, and you saw our conversation and also talked to the German Chancellor. What's your perception? How is Germany prepared for a future of artificial intelligence?
Well, it's now entering the kind of political mainstream. Until a short time ago, most of the political systems in the world kind of ignored or discounted it. Maybe in East Asia, especially in China and South Korea, there were kind of early starters realizing the immense importance of artificial intelligence, which has a lot to do with history, that especially China has this trauma of being left behind in the Industrial Revolution and consequently suffering for almost 2 centuries, terrible 2 centuries of exploitation and violence. And they have like this one-mind focus that it is not going to happen again. This time we will lead the way. And therefore they are extremely focused and very hungry when it comes to AI, whereas Europe until a short time ago was far more complacent. Probably because, again, of this historical impression that, we have this tradition of leading the world in innovation, in scientific and technological innovation, so we don't have to strive so hard.
People with a trauma sometimes can become kind of dangerous because of their radical focus. Mm-hmm. Do we need to be worried about the development of China in artificial intelligence?
I don't think we need to be worried about the development of any one particular country. I think we should be very worried about the lack of global cooperation in this field, because AI has, and all the new technologies, but especially artificial intelligence and bioengineering, have wonderful promises for humankind and also terrible dangers. And the only serious way to counter the dangers is through global cooperation. No nation by itself has any chance of regulating the development of artificial intelligence or of bioengineering. Even if you regulate yourself, let's say, take a simple example, killer robots, autonomous weapon systems, which is there is a widespread consensus, and for good reason, that this is a terrible idea, at least in the foreseeable future. But even if you have 90% of the world's countries agreeing to place a ban on the development of autonomous weapon systems, and you have just a few countries, maybe Russia, maybe Israel, maybe Japan, I don't know, who say, no, we continue, then the ban won't work. Everybody, even those who think it's a terrible idea, would be forced to break their own ban because nobody would like to stay behind in this arms race. The only real way to regulate, for example, autonomous weapon systems is through a global agreement. So what we should be most worried about is not this country or that country, but the lack of global cooperation on this.
I'm totally with you. The only thing is, if I look at the current debate, for example, in Germany and in Europe about the handling of the migration crisis, I have not much optimism in expecting that we will reach a global agreement on the implementation or non-implementation of robotic weapons.
I agree. I mean, you should differentiate between what we should do and what we actually do, or what is likely to be done. What we should do is have greater global cooperation, because the 3 main problems of humankind in the coming decades are all global in nature. They are disruptive technologies like AI, they are weapons of mass destruction, and climate change. These are the 3 main problems we face. All of them are global. None of them can be solved by a single nation. So we should have greater global cooperation, but in practice, we are going in the opposite direction, at least for the last 5-6 years or so. My fear is, as a historian, is also an historian who is very interested in the future. I think that the big danger to humankind is not artificial intelligence, it's natural stupidity.
That might well be. I think it was Vladimir Putin who said about half a year ago that artificial intelligence might be the reason for a third world war. How do you relate to that quote?
Yeah, it certainly is a possibility. Again, from two different perspectives. First of all, more and more governments are realizing that this is maybe the most important development of our time, and there is a race who is going to develop faster, who is going perhaps to monopolize this field. And if it becomes a competition between nations, then it will increase the tensions and will undermine any hope for cooperation. And secondly, if indeed the tensions increase, artificial intelligence and other related technologies might make any conflict, any war, far more destructive. Partly also by destabilizing the nuclear balance of power. In the previous time when we had this huge technological breakthrough with nuclear energy and with nuclear power, so in the 1950s and 60s, everybody were afraid that this will lead inevitably to a nuclear war which will destroy human civilization. It didn't happen. What did happen was the creation of a nuclear balance of power which actually ushered in the most peaceful era in human history. I don't know about the future, but looking back from 2018, nuclear weapons were probably the most peaceful invention ever, or the one invention in history that was responsible for more peace and harmony than any other invention. But now artificial intelligence might destabilize this huge achievement of humankind because it will make it much harder.
Oh, we need a NATO for artificial intelligence.
We need
like a NATO for artificial intelligence, or a World Artificial Intelligence Organization trying to re-establish that balance you're talking about?
It's very difficult, at least looking now, to how to re-establish the balance, because part of the problem is that if you have a lead in artificial intelligence and machine learning and computer science in general, you might be able, for example, to hijack the weapons of the other side. I mean, in 1950 or 1960, you at least had almost total control of your own weapons. You knew what you could do. But with advances in computer science, and because all these systems are increasingly based on computers, you can never be certain whether maybe the other side already has all kinds of logic bombs and Trojan horses inside my own system. And on doomsday, when I press the button, nothing happens. And this inserts a huge element of uncertainty into the system. Another huge element of uncertainty is that a third party can simulate an attack. I mean, there is an attack and you don't know who is actually behind it. Even if the missile is coming from a particular place, maybe a third party hijacked that missile in order to create a conflict, say, between two countries, and actually the third country is sitting on the sides doing like this, we got them. They think they were attacked by one another, but actually we are behind it, and you don't know. And with these kinds of uncertainties, it's much more difficult because for a good balance of power, you need certainty. The more uncertainty you have in the system, the more unbalanced it is. And also, the greater the temptation for somebody in a particular scenario to press the button before it's too late.
You know what? I can imagine current people in power where we could hope for that they press a button and nothing happens.
That's true. That's true.
It could also be an advantage in a way.
It could be an advantage, but generally speaking, if you're interested in a long-term balance, then uncertainty is a huge obstacle.
Let's try to shift the perspective a little bit. Talking about weapons and not getting too destructive right at the beginning of the conversation. One of the weapons we could use to create some kind of balance is our brain, our intelligence. You watched Sophia discussing or talking yesterday evening, and Leah mentioned the debate about what kind of artificial intelligence or non-intelligence does she or it, the robot, represent. What kind of question would you have liked to ask Sophia?
Well, the thing is that I think that for some particular purposes, like for example, to create robots for the caring industry, to take care of sick people, of old people, then there is a good reason to create humanoid robots that look like humans, and it's easier to think that, oh, they're actually human, or oh, they actually have feelings and consciousness and so forth. But more broadly, I think this feeds into a very big confusion that blurs or makes the whole discussion of AI far more complicated than it should be. And this is the confusion between intelligence and consciousness. That a lot of people, even in the industry, even in the relevant scientific departments, they tend to confuse these two completely different concepts of intelligence and consciousness, and lead to the general impression that intelligence means consciousness, and if you have artificial intelligence, it also means artificial consciousness. Now, but intelligence, it's very simple in a way. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems. Consciousness is the ability to feel things. In humans, the two go together. And not just in humans, in mammals in general, the two go together. Mammals solve problems by having feelings. But computers and other machines, they solve problems in a completely different way. And so far, we have absolutely no indication that computers are anywhere, not just anywhere near developing consciousness, developing feelings, but even on the path to developing consciousness and feelings, and it will happen in 20 years or 50 years or 100 years. No, so far there has been just zero development in computer consciousness. There is absolutely no indication that computers have even a tiny bit of feelings or sensations or emotions. And it could be that, it's a bit like, airplanes and birds. Airplanes now fly much faster than birds, but they never develop feathers. They're just flying in a different way. So mammals evolved towards greater and greater intelligence by way of consciousness. Our way to intelligence is through the path of consciousness. It goes together. But computers may be, just as airplanes fly in a different way than birds, computers may be advancing along towards superintelligence from a different direction. And there is absolutely no reason to think that they will have feelings and emotions, and we should have robot rights and things like that, because ethics is really about feelings, is about consciousness. An entity that has no consciousness, it could be the most intelligent thing in the universe. If it has no consciousness, it has no ethical standing. So we should be very careful not to contribute to this general confusion.
It just makes it easier, like you said, for human beings to relate to a machine if it looks human, but still there is the danger of mixing up a lot of things that need to be distinguished. If I get you right, you think that the human consciousness is unique?
It's not unique. Other animals also have consciousness. Baboons have consciousness, pigs have consciousness, rats have consciousness. So it's not something unique to Homo sapiens.
But they can't plan for the future, for example.
Well, certainly they can. Rats plan for the future, monkeys plan for the future. They are not as good as humans in all kinds of activities, from building hospitals to building H-bombs. Humans are better than rats. But in terms of the basic capacity to feel things, to sense things, to have a subjective world of experiences, they are on roughly an equal footing to us. They can, I mean, the ultimate test of consciousness is suffering, if you can suffer or not. If you want to know whether something has consciousness, ask whether it can suffer. So a robot, as far as we can know, doesn't suffer at all. Even if you disconnect it from the electricity, even if you hack it to bits, it doesn't suffer. And similarly, a bank or a nation, they are not living entities. They can't suffer even if they have a bankruptcy. They go bankrupt or they lose a war, they don't suffer. But humans and monkeys and cows and rats, they can suffer. That's the meaning that they have consciousness.
Isn't also the combination or the interaction, the interrelation between the brain and the body something that makes our consciousness different from whatever machine can expect to evolve into? Mm-hmm. Like, because you experience the world by, of course, thinking about it, but also by grabbing what you experience in your environment.
Yeah, our consciousness is through and through embodied consciousness. It doesn't float in some disconnected space. And when we imagine AI as a kind of humanoid robot, in addition to this confusion between intelligence and consciousness, it also creates confusion or hides from us a lot of other things. And AI is not an individual entity like a particular body. It's maybe easiest to understand in the context of the traffic system. A lot of people think about, the idea of now replacing human drivers with self-driving cars in terms of individual entities. Okay, I have a human driver, and I replace this driver with a particular computer, with a particular car, and let's see who drives better, who has less accidents. But this is a completely wrong way to think about it. The biggest advantage of self-driving cars over humans is that humans are individuals, which is a terrible thing in traffic, whereas self-driving cars are not individuals. Now, what does it mean? It means that self-driving cars have two immense advantages over human drivers. This is updatability and connectivity. With humans, each human on the road is an individual entity which is disconnected from the other humans on the road, and their communication is always a source of trouble. If two cars driven by humans approach the same junction from different directions, they need to communicate their intentions. I turn left, I stop, I turn right, and a lot of accidents happen because this communication is partial and is full of errors. But with self-driving cars, it's not like that. It's not that you have two different self-driving cars approach a junction. They are the same thing. They are parts of one algorithm. They are not individual. The two self-driving cars can be part of a single system, of a single algorithm, in a way that two humans can't. And then when the two cars approach the same junction, they have 100% or 99.9% connectivity. They know exactly. I mean, they are not two entities that need to communicate. They are one entity. So the chances of a traffic accident is not zero, but is far, far smaller. The other big advantage is ability to update. Let's say you have a new traffic regulation. You can drive you shouldn't drive more than 50 kilometers per hour in this part of town. Now, with humans, it's so difficult to update all the drivers about the new regulation, and even if you update it, maybe they don't comply.
Yeah.
With AI, you press a button and immediately all the vehicles, say in Germany, are at the same moment updated about the new traffic regulation, and all of them, unless you program them to break the law, all of them will comply with the new regulation.
And isn't that an example for human liberty? To not comply, like stick to the traffic example. If you want to park your car where you are not allowed to do so, you can still do it, and then you have to pay for it. Me, for example, pretty often. That's a very tiny example, but it's an example for liberty to not comply. And I can imagine sitting in an autonomous car, and the car just won't let me stop somewhere because it's not allowed to do so.
Yeah.
That's a horrible vision of our future world.
Well, first of all, it depends. It gives immense power to a centralized system that decides what should and shouldn't be done. And it has wonderful potential if the regulations are good, and it has terrible potential if the regulations are bad. So again, it goes both ways. And we shouldn't think about it as an inflexible system, that let's say somebody is having a heart attack and you must stop the car in a place which is forbidden, and the robot will say, no, computer says, no, you can't stop here. No, you can just, a good programmer you can take into consideration all kinds of scenarios, and you can also learn from experience. And the rule will have a million exceptions, which constantly develop and update. And yes, it will never be perfect. You will have accidents in which you have these huge headlines that because of a computer error or because of a computer refusing to do something because they are so rigid, somebody died. It will happen, definitely. It already happened, actually. But in order to switch to such a system, it's irrational to expect the computers to be perfect and only then make the switch. They just have to be better than humans. And to be better than humans is not so difficult, certainly not in the field of traffic. Every year, about 1.25 million people are killed in traffic accidents. More than 90% of these accidents are the result of human errors, such as humans falling asleep while driving, or somebody texting a message while driving, or somebody drinking alcohol and then driving. And in order to switch to a self-driving car system, if self-driving cars kill only 100,000 people a year, that's a huge improvement. So I think this is the yardstick. And in other, I think traffic is relatively a simple matter. Of course, when you look into other fields of activity, the moral issues become far more complicated. I am, for example, in favor of switching to self-driving cars. I can't wait for the day when humans won't be able to drive cars. I think it will be a very huge step forward for humankind. But in contrast, I definitely don't look forward for the day in which you have autonomous weapon systems replacing more and more humans in the military. And in other fields, like in passing judgment. So there are also a lot of ideas about replacing human judges with AI. First of all, not so much in passing judgment, but in deciding the sentence. Whether to sentence, okay, you decided this person is guilty of this and this crime, whether he should go or she should go to jail for 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. And there are so many problems with humans making these decisions with all kinds of unconscious or sometimes conscious biases. And there are good arguments for, in this part of the legal process, just deciding the sentence, in passing more and more of the authority from humans to algorithms. But it raises far more complicated ethical problems than, say, self-driving cars.
Yeah, but let's stick with the self-driving cars for one more moment, because I think it's also a very good example to show why we shouldn't strive for making artificial intelligence like human intelligence. If cars had consciousness or could act like a human, they would start to become mean. They would start to game the traffic system. They would start to try to overtake and be quicker than, and we suddenly would have exactly the mess we have with humans driving.
Yeah.
So that shows us why artificial intelligence needs to be restricted to that systematic approach like you described before.
Yeah, and again, I think that there is very little danger. I mean, I don't think that cars will become conscious anytime soon. Maybe in 100 years, in 200 years, we'll have the technology. But in the next 20 or 30 years, it's not impossible. We just don't understand consciousness. So it's not completely impossible that you could create a non-organic consciousness based on some kind of a computer system. But we don't see any evidence for it. And I'm a huge fan of science fiction, but I think the greatest sin of science fiction in the last few decades has been to implant this confusion in the minds of humans, the confusion between intelligence and consciousness, because 95, if not 99% of science fiction movies and books about artificial intelligence are actually about artificial consciousness. The usual plot is you have the robot, like we saw yesterday, and the robot gains consciousness, and then either the scientist falls in love with the robot, or the robot becomes evil and tries to kill all the humans. All the two things happen at the same time. And this is, as far as we can say now, completely irrelevant. It's really nonsense. I think personally that all these movies are about something completely different. They are not about AI. If you notice, and also it was true yesterday, in almost all cases the robot is female. And the scientist who falls in love with the robot and then she tries to kill him or something is male. And
it's like in real life in a way.
And these are not movies about humans being afraid of intelligent robots. They are movies about men being afraid of intelligent women.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that most of these movies are actually about the feminist revolution and not about the AI revolution. It's just a metaphor.
Yeah, and we're transcribing that stereotype and that fear into the next system, into our algorithms.
I mean,
the bias.
To even imagine, how can a robot have a sex or a gender? It doesn't mean anything. I mean, for organic creatures, or at least multicellular organic creatures like mammals, then sex and gender have a meaning. But in terms of AI and robots, just to think that an AI has a gender identity, it doesn't mean anything.
There's an example, not in science fiction, but in real life, which might be quite a difficult one in the light of what you're just talking about, which is sex robots. You have sex robots that can look like the person you imagine, like Scarlett Johansson or Yuval Harari, whoever you like to. Sorry for that, but yeah, you can just order a sex robot that looks like you. And we even have bordels with sex robots already, for example, in Barcelona. What do you think of such a development? Is that something that just shows us how peculiar humans sometimes might be, or does it even worsen the problem of the incarnation of a robot like Sophia?
Well, I think that the main worry is about the psychological impact on the humans. There is a huge advantage of sex robots compared to humans who work in the sex industry, which is, again, the robots don't suffer. So I heard there was even a case of, I think in Canada, of a man who was prosecuted for ordering a child sex robot, I think from South Korea or something like that. And they kind of made a distinction. It's okay to have an adult sex robot, but not a child sex robot. And in terms of the robot, it's just a machine with absolutely no consciousness. There is nothing there. So you can't commit a crime against the robot. There is still a huge ethical issue with what is it doing to the psychology of the person. of the human involved there. And this should be an important consideration. But luckily, we don't have to worry about what is it doing to the robot, because it's not doing anything to the robot.
At least not to the robot. Yeah. At least not to the robot.
Yeah, again, to the human and how he or she afterwards relates to other humans, and what is it doing to the personal development of that particular human, that's a big issue that we should think about carefully. But we don't need to get involved in the discussion of what is it doing to the robot, because it doesn't do anything to the robot. The robot it's not conscious. It can't suffer in any way.
You said before, you could imagine that like in 100 years or so, there could be something like an artificial consciousness. What does that do to the concept of free will for humankind?
Well, the discussion about free will is really, you don't need futuristic scenarios of artificial consciousness to be engaged with it or to worry about it. As far as I understand, even today, our present scientific knowledge points out very clearly that free will is a myth. It's a fiction. It's like belief in soul or belief in God. It's a myth we have inherited from previous generations, from previous era. It's an empty concept. There is nothing like free will in nature. Science knows of only two kinds of processes in nature, deterministic and random. And when you combine the two, you get probabilistic processes. But there is nothing like freedom. Humans definitely have a will, just as rats and monkeys have desires. They want all kinds of things. And if by free will you mean the ability to freely exercise your will, to do what you want, I want to drink this water, I take it, I drink it, yes. In this sense, there is free will for humans, for rats, for baboons, for all mammals. But if by free will, and this is usually the deeper meaning, you mean the freedom to choose your will, there is no such thing. Nobody has any freedom to choose his or her desires, his or her will. And I think that the more we understand how humans function, the more clear it becomes. And actually, you can witness it yourself very easily. Just if you try to focus, close your eyes and just try to focus on what is happening inside me now, and try to notice the next thought that pops up in your mind, the next desire that pops up in your mind. Where did it come from? I didn't choose it freely. It's not that I choose freely, now I will desire to drink water, and only then the desire to drink water pops up. No, it pops up for reasons that I usually have no idea what they are.
But you can make the decision not to drink the water.
But this decision too is based on things that I don't choose freely. Maybe I'm a control freak and a desire pops up and I say, no, I won't do it. Did I choose to be a control freak? When was it in my history that I made this decision? And you can say, okay, at age 12, you read this book about self-improvement or whatever, and you read that people who have very strong self-control, they succeed in life. And then you said, yes, I want to be a self-controlling person. But why did you, reading this book, made this decision, whereas somebody else who read the same book did not make this decision? Because there was some predisposition, which is the result of genetics, or which is the result of your personal history, of the combination. No matter how back you go, every decision you make is based on tendencies, on desires that you did not choose freely. And I don't think we don't give up anything when we give up this illusion of free will. We just give up an illusion. And I think it's very important, especially in the world of today, to go beyond this illusion, because people who have too strong a belief in their freedom of will are the easiest people to manipulate. Mm-hmm. We are now entering the era of hacking humans. We now, for the first time in history, not we, but some systems in the world, whether in China or in Silicon Valley or in Russia, they are gaining for the first time the ability to really hack human beings. Not our smartphones and emails, but what's happening inside us. Our hatreds, our fears, our desires, and this gives these systems abilities of manipulation which are unprecedented. And the easiest people to manipulate are the people who say, I can't be manipulated. I have a free will. Whatever I choose in life, whether to buy this car or vote for that party, I chose out of my free will. And then all you need to do is find out the hatreds, the fears, the anger of this particular individual, and it's so easy to manipulate them. And it's not restricted to one side of the political spectrum. You can also be a left-wing liberal, and it's if they discover that you have some, prejudice against hillbillies in Mississippi, it's so easy to create a fake news story about these stupid Bible-thumping hillbillies in Mississippi, and you will believe it. And you will become angry, and your hatred will increase, and society will be polarized even further. And you say, no, nobody can manipulate me. I have free will. This is my free will.
So that basically means if we refrain from the concept or give up the concept of free will, we will be set free and better prepared to cope with so-called fake news and manipulation?
I think so. When you have a better understanding of yourself, it's more difficult to manipulate you, and to have a better understanding of yourself means to have a better understanding of my weaknesses, of my fears, of my hatreds, which I didn't choose. I mean, the illusion of free will is dangerous because it gives at least some people the impression that there is nothing to know about myself because I'm this free agent, and at any moment in life I can just choose to do whatever I want. And if you are under this impression, then really getting to know your hatreds, your fears, what makes you angry, it's unnecessary.
I have another fear. I think I kind of relate to what you're arguing, how you are arguing, but still I think that giving up the concept of free will, the distinctive concept of free will and vetoing and all those kinds of things, means that we adapt to the more or less Silicon Valley view of a human being basically a flawed machine, in a way, a deterministic machine.
Oh, it's not deterministic, that's for sure. There is a huge element of randomness still there. But I think that you can look at it from two perspectives. You can look at it from the perspective of control, of, a human is basically a machine, so an outside system, whether it's government, whether it's a private corporation, I will hack this machine, and then I will be able to control it better. Versus the internal subjective view from inside that, I am this machine in the sense that I have no control. I'm not responsible for choosing my particular preferences and tendencies and so forth. And the better I understand this, the more difficult it is for these internal forces to hijack me, and for external forces to control and manipulate me in that way. And I think in the end it's an empirical question. You should just try and see if by getting to know yourself better, by getting to know what are the buttons that people can push and it makes me angry or it makes me fearful or whatever. If this makes you a better person, if this makes you a more balanced person, a more compassionate person, then that's very good. That's wonderful. If this makes you a more passive and pessimistic person, then it's not very good. But I'll just say to people, try and see. What happens when you really get to know better these internal forces within you? From my own experience and from the experience of looking at other people in this situation, in the vast majority of cases, the result is not passivity and depression, The result is really a new sense of action in the world. Action that it is coming not from blindly following whatever the last thought that pops up into my mind, but something which has a far more comprehensive view of the world, of society. You're less swayed by these internal waves, and you can really see better what is happening in the world around you and what is the impact, say, of your actions on other people and on their condition.
I read somewhere that you take about 60 days every year for a meditation retreat, where you really draw back without reading, without communicating. Mm-hmm. Does that have to do with the process you were just describing, that you try to figure out in detail your buttons other people might be able to push, your ways of looking at the world, and trying to reset that in a way, or?
Trying to get to know that, I take every year between 30 and 60 days off from all my schedule to go and do a Vipassana retreat. And you really just sit there for 60 days and observe what's happening inside me. And you don't try to change anything, you just get to know better these internal forces. And when you sit, for example, you have 60 days, so a lot of things come up. When you sit, say, for 2 weeks with a lot of hatred, like you sit there from early morning till late night, you meditate, you just observe, and hatred comes up, you just get to know this hatred far better. And then it's still there. It's not like I got rid of all my hatred, but when it comes up, I know, I've been watching this hatred for 2 weeks. I know it much better, so I'm not free from it, but it has less power over me. I know the story already. And when you know the story, it's not impossible, but it's more difficult for this story to take you for a ride, to hijack you.
It's also, in a broader sense, maybe something about a purpose. Every individual human needs to reconsider once in a while to understand him or herself better. And that's something that comes up to my mind very often when I think about the future of artificial intelligence and the impact on the labor market and our economy. You talk about a useless class that will come up and be driven by artificial intelligence. What do we do about that? Where do people get their purpose from if there's no work anymore?
Well, we need to differentiate two different problems. First, what will happen to the job market? And the general agreement is that we will have a complete disruption of the job market in the next few decades because of AI. Lots of jobs will disappear. Probably some new jobs will appear. The biggest problem will not necessarily be an absolute absence of jobs. It will be the problem of retraining, reskilling, and reinventing yourself. That you're a 50-year-old taxi driver, you just lost your job because there are no more jobs for human drivers. There are all these self-driving cars. But there are new jobs, let's say in designing virtual reality games. How do you retrain yourself and reinvent yourself at age 50 as a designer of virtual reality games? And for that, you need both a lot of external help, say from the government. Maybe it takes 1 year of school at age 50 to learn the new skills, so you need for 1 year to be supported by the government at a level which can feed you and support you and your family and so forth. And also to get this retraining, education for grown-ups. And also there is the psychological problem of how do you create a new me, a new identity, a new professional identity, a new identity at age 50. And maybe you have to do it again and again, because the automation revolution will not be like a one-time event, that you have a big revolution, all these jobs disappear, all these jobs emerge, you train the population, and that's it, revolution over. No, it will continue and it will be a cascade of ever bigger changes. So, okay, you will train yourself at a particular period, and then after 10 years, you have to do it all over again because your new job has just disappeared again. So this will create immense psychological stress. So one issue is how do we not just retrain people and support them through this process economically, but also psychologically. And
what about a universal basic income?
This is one of the ideas of how to do it. And the other problem, which here UBI, Universal Basic Income, is even more relevant, what happens if some people are just incapable of doing it? Either because they just don't have the skills and it's too late to retrain them, or because they can't handle the psychological stress. That, I don't know, I'm now 50 years old, I've went through 2 cycles of reinventing myself. I studied one thing at age 20, I reinvented myself at age 30, I reinvented myself again at age 40, I'm done. I can't do it again, it's too much. So I'm out of the job market at age 50, but maybe I still have 60 years to go because life expectancy is increasing. So what do you do with a person who has 60 years left in his or her full capacity physically and mentally, but they are out of the job market? So you need first to support them for 60 years without working, and secondly, what do they do all day? And where do they get meaning and purpose and so forth? So this is a different issue that we will have to face. And it's a big question of, I guess, different societies, different countries might have completely different strategies about how to deal with it. And some societies, some strategies might be very cruel, of just, you're out of the game, we don't care about you. And then we could have a huge class of kind of useless people. Useless not from the viewpoint of their parents or children, useless from the viewpoint of the economic and political system. They have nothing to contribute to society. They have no political power. The political system doesn't care about them. They don't have the power to stage a revolution to resist. So what happens with all these millions? It's not a prophecy, it's not an inevitability, it depends on choices that different societies might make.
Yeah, it depends on choices, very, very important. Otherwise, that would be really depressing if that would be an automatism. We will be opening up to your questions in a minute, so prepare and think about what you would like to know from Yuval Harari. My last question is to your books. You wrote a big book on history of mankind. You wrote a big book about our future, Homo Deus, and your next one is coming out in September, 21 Lessons on the 21st Century. So maybe in a few brief words, what's your basic analysis of our current times?
Well, the new book, 21 Lessons, is really, it takes the insights from the long view of the past and from the long view of the future to look at current affairs, at issues that are now in the headlines, whether it's the rise of nationalism, the immigration crisis, terrorism, all these issues. Let's take a look at them from the really broad perspective. So it doesn't have a single thesis or a single storyline. It looks at a variety of current affair issues from this long-term perspective. Maybe if I still try to kind of summarize it, maybe at least one of the key messages is that all the main problems of the present era of current affairs are really global problems and can have only global solutions. There is no local or national solution to any of the major problems of the world. So there is still a lot of room in the world for nationalism, for local patriotism, but to solve the really big problems, no nation can solve climate change by itself. No nation can, by itself, regulate the dangerous potential of bioengineering or artificial intelligence. As we said before, it's enough if just one nation decides to take a high-risk, high-gain path, like developing autonomous weapon systems, and all the other nations will be forced to follow it. So as against the current trends, I think the only real hope for humanity to avoid the worst-case scenarios is by building stronger global ties. It's not a global government, it's not a global empire, it's just more global loyalty and global cooperation.
And it's no local solutions, and that might also be a message to Bavaria in these days. So let's go on with questions from the audience. We have mics out there. Please introduce yourself very quickly, and please ask questions and don't do co-referee statements. Who's going first, please?
Hi, my name is Luis Hahnemann. I have a question in regards with all your knowledge you have gathered in the last years. What would you say, what's the easiest and best way to, even if it sounds cheesy, to make the world a better place? Like, what roles do you see? One is maybe like you as being an advocate of how you see the future. What other roles do you see?
Well, it depends who you are in the world. Different people can make different contributions. There is no single magic bullet that everybody should do this. On the individual level, I think that it's, as I said before, it's very important for people to get to know themselves better. Now, this is kind of the oldest advice in the book. If you want to be cheesy, know yourself is like, you can't get more cheesier than that. But I think there is a difference between today and the age of Socrates or Confucius or Buddha. And the big difference is that now you have competition. 1,000 years ago, people told you, know yourself. But okay, if I don't do it, so, well, the price is high, but nobody is going to do it other than me. But today, you have all these systems which are working as we speak on getting to know you. Whether it's Google and Facebook, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party or the government, their number one project is to know you, to gather enough data on you and analyze this data and know how to press your buttons. So if you're in a competition and you're not in a good place, they are running very fast. And it's really, in this sense, the responsibility of every person to get to know himself or herself better before the corporations and the government do it, because once they get to know you better than you know yourself, it's so easy to manipulate you. And the more convinced you are that they can't manipulate me, I have free will, the easier it will be to manipulate you. So this is kind of the task of every individual. And then there are tasks for where you are in society. I'll give just one example. If you're a computer engineer, then I would say the number one task is today to improve distributed data processing. What we see today is that the technological pendulum is going in the direction of centralized data processing. That centralized data processing, because of machine learning, because of AI, is becoming more and more efficient. And if this trend continues, that means that centralized systems, authoritarian systems, dictatorial systems will become far more efficient. And this is not necessarily the best result for humankind. So as a computer engineer, I would say try to invest your talents in improving distributed data processing. So there are movements in that direction. For example, much of the hype around blockchain is that maybe blockchain is the thing that will balance machine learning and AI by making distributed systems a bit more efficient. I don't know. But this is a kind of, and like this, different professions have their own things to do.
Other questions? There's one in the back. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Yuval Gimishai. Thank you very much for the thought-provoking statements. One of the thoughts that provoked me was when you talked about the moral argument for having machine cars that are operated by AI rather than having individuals or humans drive them, and the argument was you would have less people die. But that provoked me because is it sufficient as an argument? Because the problem with a system choosing who dies because of a fault, of a flaw, of something that has been, that humans won't understand, who are not into AI, who are not able to see the back of the machine. So isn't that about trusting humans and not trusting humans rather than having a system that you have to trust? And if you encourage people to trust a system, does that not make us blind to broader questions such as maybe a state using a system such as cars to regulate the population? And I mean, there is a huge danger to that. And to say, oh, less people are dying, is that enough of an argument? Because at the end of the day, we understand that someone has been killed because someone, was sleeping, or, the other reasons you've mentioned. So isn't it about trusting or not trusting humans and then trusting or not trusting a system? Is that enough of an argument?
Well, yeah, it's certainly a more complex issue, and you point to a very important argument, that even in such a case, there is a price to be paid from switching our trust from humans to a system, because it may make people trust the system in other areas where this trust is not warranted. Other arguments are, for example, that this could also mean surveillance, complete surveillance of people, because if all the traffic is through a single AI system, so this system knows wherever you go. And you lose privacy, you lose anonymity. Yeah, there is more surveillance, so there is a price to be paid there. And that's definitely true. I think when you look to the future, what we need is balance. We have to be careful of this technological utopianism that just let's give all our trust to the AI, to the machine, they are far better. And in all areas, let's just switch, give up our authority to the AI. And the other extreme is that whatever suggestion is made to improve things with AI or robotics, just to see all the potential dangers and develop this hysteria or paranoia, and refuse in any field. I always wanted to stay with humans, and we are not there even today. I mean, more and more, like in airplanes, 90-something% of the time, it's an automatic system. And when there is like a storm and the airplane has to land, so they tell the pilots, don't trust your eyes and your senses, just fly blind, relying on the instruments. And it's already happening today, and it's good. So what we need is, again, a balanced view, to not make sweeping judgments, always do like this or that, but take every case into consideration and weigh the options. And I think that, again, in the case of traffic accidents, at least for me, it's quite clear that the advantages are bigger than the disadvantages. So we still need to solve a lot of difficult problems. What happens with privacy? Would this system be able to follow us and transfer this information to the government or whatever, or not? We have to think, what happens if there is an accident? Who is responsible? Who can we sue in court? But it shouldn't make us, just because of these fears, completely give up the opportunities of the new technology.
One more question. Oh, we have a lot of. Can we maybe collect 2 or 3 questions and then make a roundup? Is that
yeah.
Is that okay? So we have Frank, we have someone in the back, and here on the right-hand side. We take the 3 questions. Please be very brief.
So Yuval, what's your pick on Germany in all the discussion? What's going on in the world?
Okay.
Okay. There is one, and over there was a question as well.
Willem Schmund, just a short question. You mentioned and made it very clear
that the solution for the challenges that are arising with artificial intelligence needs to be taken on a supranatural level, not on a national level. And there are examples in history, Geneva Convention, nuclear non-proliferation, United Nations, that those models can actually exist and work. And from all the conversation and exchanges and meetings that you are having and that you had throughout the last couple of days, do you feel that there is any nation or institution or person that is actually taking the initiative to create and enact such a supranational body, just in order to understand with how much pessimism or optimism I need to leave, actually?
Okay. Was there some question?
Simone Menne, in Homo sapiens, you wrote that females are, for biological reasons, inferior. Do you think, looking into the future, that it's still true?
Oh, I don't remember ever writing something like that. I said that the most common explanation that some people give for the inferior position of women in most human societies in history, legally, economically, politically, is that these people say that women are biologically inferior. They are weaker, they are less smart, and so forth. And then I try to explain to the best of my ability why this argument is nonsensical and that there is no scientific basis for this argument. If at all, then the real question is the opposite. What science now seems to indicate is that power in human societies is based above all on cooperation, and that general thinking, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but general thinking is that women actually have an advantage when it comes to social intelligence, to cooperation, to compromise, and so forth. And therefore, for biological reasons, we should have seen at least more societies in history dominated by women. And this is not the case, and we don't know why.
That's very good news. That's very good news, I think. Now we have the institution or person leading the movement question.
Okay, so about Germany and about the international situation. Well, first about Germany, I would say that the good news is that I think that if you look at the whole of human history and you have to choose like a place and time to live, then you can hardly do better than Germany in the early 21st century. I mean, people often don't realize it because they take for granted what they already have. But this is one of the best places ever to be in. Still, there are many problems. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's just, when did humans ever had it better than in Germany of the early 21st century? As a historian, I can't really think of any place or anywhere. But the human nature is such that we tend to take what we have for granted and then focus our attention on what we don't have and become extremely disappointed about if we can't achieve it. So you can live in relatively the best place in the world and still feel very disappointed and very frustrated. Oh, the system isn't working and we need something else, and so forth. Regarding the bigger international situation and also where Germany is in that context, so in the last few years, the trend is very negative in terms of the chances for global cooperation and global loyalty. And I have no idea. I mean, again, I can say with a lot of certainty, at least personally, that in order to survive and flourish, humankind needs stronger global cooperation, but this doesn't mean that this is actually what people will do. At present, more and more nations are taking the insular, isolationist, nationalist path, caring only about themselves, and this is a kind of vicious circle, because the more nations are adopting this self-centered perspective, the more pressure there is on the other nations to do the same, because why should they just care about themselves and I have to carry this increasing burden of taking care of global problems, of the whole of humankind? But I hope that enough nations will continue to think about the global good and not just about their interests, especially because in the long run there is no conflict there. Unless we are able to create good global cooperation, this is extremely bad news for the interests of all the nations. And even though at present things don't look promising, again, we can look back at the way that humankind managed to deal with the previous existential crisis it faced, which was the threat of nuclear war during the Cold War. And in the 1950s and 60s, things looked extremely grim, far worse than today. I mean, people today, again, you always have this self-centered view that things now are much worse than any time before. So if you think back, say, to the Cuban Missile Crisis and where the world was there, we are still not there. Despite the growing tensions, we are still living in the most peaceful era in human history.
That's a wonderful last word. We're living in the most peaceful area. You have something in common with Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Do you know what?
No.
It's your socks.
Oh.
Yeah. It's
Really?
your socks, and I would like to take them as a symbol in a way that all we need to debate about the future of AI and humankind and all the critical and maybe sometimes dark parts of it. In between, there's always a colorful and delightful little spot we can find.
Well, the thanks for that go to my husband. He chose the socks. So.
Yeah, then thanks to your husband. Very good. Thank you, Yuval. That was wonderful.
Ada. Heute das Morgen verstehen.